Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la la. Ay, ay, la 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 la, ay, la 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 la. Ay la 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 la, ay la 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 la, ay la 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 la. Ay la 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 la, ay la 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 la, ay la 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 la. Ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la. Once again, everybody, Boker Tov. I actually want to pick up on a theme that we started last month, the theme of light and darkness, and what the meaning of lights are. Of course, last time it was Hanukkah, and I want to extend it to a broader exploration today, specifically focusing in on a very important line in the Parsha this week that I want to share. So this is the text study component now of our mindfulness, Jewish mindfulness class, from Parshat Bo. Here's a line. It says, "Then the Lord said to Moses, hold out your arm toward the sky, that there may be darkness upon the land of Egypt, a darkness that can be touched. Moses held out his arm toward the sky, and thick darkness descended upon all the land of Egypt for 3 days. People could not see one another, and for 3 days no one could get up from where he was, but all Israelites enjoyed light in their dwellings." So there's a lot to unpack here. And the question that I think that we want to investigate in this setting is what does the Torah really mean by darkness? What is really going on here? It's a strange depiction of darkness and it raises lots of questions. It's one thing if the sun doesn't shine and it's just at nighttime for 3 days, that's certainly frightening. But why is it that the Egyptians are so immobilized by the darkness? Why is it that they can't even get up from their homes? They can't do anything. They seem trapped in a darkness that the Israelites, according to this, don't have, at least in their dwellings, in their b'moshvotam means in the place where they dwelled, in their living spaces. So what is this darkness? So I just wanted to take a look at what some of the commentaries, medieval and modern and ancient, say about this. Rashi says this very interesting, I put it in bold here, a darkness that can be touched. And the Hebrew is v'yamesh choshech. What does that mean? A darkness that can be touched or felt. What is that? And he says, v'yamesh choshech signifies the darkness mentioned in the preceding phrase, v'yehi choshech, shall darken for them the natural darkness to a higher degree than the darkness of night. That is, the darkness of night shall become even more black and dark. What is that? You can touch it. It's darker, according to Rashi. Let's keep going. Here's Nachmanides, Ramban. Lo kamu ish mitachtav. No man could see his brother, nor could anyone rise from his place. This darkness was not just that there was no sunlight. It was more than a nighttime darkness. It was thick darkness, meaning that a very thick mist, I think it's supposed to say, came down from the sky. This is why God said to Moses, stretch forth your hand to heaven. Moses had to bring down this darkness. So for Nachmanides, it was a literal dark mist, like a dark cloud that came down from the heavens. So he's interpreting it very materialistically. And I just wanted to bring in a parallel story now from the Midrash, Breshit Rabbah. And this is another experience of darkness, which might shed some light, if you'll forgive the expression on this. After having committed the first sin, Adam saw his first sunset and it filled him with dread. The Midrash teaches that after having committed the first sin, Adam saw his first sunset on the eve of Shabbat. He was alarmed, afraid that the world was blacking out, running down, and that he had caused it to happen. That the cosmic darkness, he thought, not only reflected his own inner darkness, but perhaps resulted from it. At sunrise, Adam realized it was the way of the world and that he would have to cope with it and confront the darkness. After Shabbat, God gave Adam 2 flints, which Adam struck together and created fire. Blessing God, blessed are you who creates the lights of fire. It's a wonderful midrash. I actually am bringing this because, you know, we're practicing mindfulness here. And when we practice mindfulness, I like to talk about how we're adopting a different frame. We're looking from the radically personal or subjective experience on life. So for Adam, that first night of that first Shabbos night that he experienced was the same thing that the Egyptians were experiencing. It was the same darkness, because it wasn't just the lack of light, it was also his panic and his terror that, in a sense, the darkness, just like it says, it not only reflected his own inner darkness, but resulted from it, right? That if you can have a darkness that happens to you, even physically in the world, but then the darkness becomes yamesh choshech. It becomes a palpable darkness, a blackness that is existentially terrifying when you project your fear onto it. When you are absolutely terrified of that darkness, then the darkness becomes even darker and more enveloping. And I think that's what the experience of that darkness is, what this midrash wants us to call to mind as we look through this. Rabbi Hanoch of Alexander, Hasidic Rebbe, a person did not see his brother. That is to say, each individual only worried about himself and only looked to save himself and the members of his households, and thus did not rise from under the darkness for 3 days. Not a single one of them succeeded in rising above the degraded spiritual level that they were caught in. The Egyptians were responsible for their own darkness because of their selfishness and self-centeredness. It was not the symptom of darkness, it was the cause. Their darkness was spiritual. Well, there he is, he lays it right out. What is the plague of darkness? The plague of darkness is actually something that comes from within ourselves. It emerges from, as he says, our own fearful selfishness and self-centeredness. That's darkness. Let me reframe it in mindfulness terms. It is our own ego-centric way of experiencing the world that is the source of darkness. When we are totally identified as separate from the universe, separated off from other people, that's generating a darkness. Just like Adam was afraid that the darkness was coming from himself, it was coming from himself, from his own fearfulness. You follow what I'm saying here, right? That it is, the plague is really brought on by the Egyptians, by a culture that could enslave people, that in a certain way, what the plague of darkness is showing the Egyptians is that their culture that dehumanizes, in a way, enslaves them. They were the ones who were really enslaving themselves in the plague of spiritual darkness. And that's what happens to any society. So that happens writ large on a societal level and individually on our own level when we become defined by our ego, by our fears. Then we are projecting darkness into our own lives from our own hearts. Or HaChaim, Rabbi Chaim ben Attar, the darkness of the Egyptians is described in individual terms. Lo ra'u ish et achiv. Person did not see his brother. For all the children of Israel, there was light in their dwellings. He comments on this word, ulechol. No matter what, a Jew had light. Whenever a Jew went into the house of an Egyptian, he still had light, even within the dwellings of the Egyptian. The light of the Israelites is communal. I think this is beautiful, huh? Right? That this is, what is this? If the Egyptians were generating darkness in their own experience, it was from the values of the kind of community that they were creating. Whereas the Israelites, who understood caring for each other, of a vision of freedom as well, that's what generates light in their lives, right? And here's Rabbi Avraham Aryeh Trugman. In psychological terms, darkness represents a sense of depression that is fed by despair and purposelessness. Depression causes people to feel alone, as if no one cares about them, and in turn leads them not to care about others. This phenomenon is quite literally described in biblical verse. No one could see their brother. An even more extreme form of depression occurs when people are completely sunk in the abyss and virtually unable to move. They are stuck in a state of physical or emotional paralysis. This phenomenon is also quite literally described in the biblical verse, nor could anyone get up from his place. I'll tell you, keep this one in mind, and then I just want to read one more, and then we're gonna stop looking at the text for a few minutes. Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav. He says the evil inclination is more interested in the depression following a sin than in the act of sinning itself. For nothing is as spiritually or even physically debilitating as depression. And he had a way of calling depression. He called it marash chora, which literally means bitter blackness. So he knew from the plague of darkness, and that is the plague of depression. In the exodus from Egypt, nationally and personally entailed confronting the darkness and returning to the light. They held on to the light and hope of salvation. Just as the plague of darkness immediately preceded the redemption from Egypt, so too the darkest hour always comes right before the dawn. Knowing this secret and deciding never to give up are the greatest antidotes against the evil inclination's ultimate secret weapon of depression, right? I'm going to stop sharing for a moment and just talk to you a little bit. I don't know if I've ever shared this, but I have been through a severe depression in my life. And I'm sure I'm not the only one on this call who has known serious depression, a debilitating depression. And I have lived through the plague of darkness. I've been there. And there's one, and if you've been through depression, you might know, like I do, that when you remember it, everything is kind of in sepia tones. Like even the memories of going through it are darkened. And one of my sepia tone memories of when I was in the midst of a very profound depression is, and I'll never forget this memory. I was sitting with my family and it was Shabbos dinner. And my kids were quite young at the time. And it was a beautiful Shabbat table. The candles were lit. The challah was there, the wine was there, this wonderful food, my gorgeous children, my beautiful wife, we were all sitting around the table. And I remember all I could pay attention to in the midst of that memory was the blackness of the world outside the windows of that dining room. I could, and the nighttime outside, I literally had a sense of it weighing on the house. I'll never, this was so real. I mean, and this is absolutely how I experienced it. And I could feel, even though there was light in my house, I could feel the darkness closing in such a way that it was intolerable. So I literally experienced that darkness, v'yamesh choshech, a darkness that could be felt, that could be touched. Right? I felt it in every fiber of my being, the nighttime pressing down on my home. And unfortunately, that was something I'll never forget. And thank God I was able to come out of that depression with years of intensive therapy and SSRIs and everything else that these wonderful blessings that we have that can help take people out of those experiences. It's not true for everybody. Not all these things work for everybody. And so some of us in our community still struggle with Yamesh Choshech. And whether or not you actually have dealt with, God forbid you should, if you never have, may you never. But we all experience aspects of that kind of darkness in our lives, just to a lesser degree. Because what is it all? It's all this kind of inward turning of the egoic mind in on itself. And we all have times in our lives where this happens. And in fact, this happens a million times a day. Every time we turn on the news and there's something frightening about a pandemic, and we look out into the world and we feel this disease closing in on us, where we see people, you know, the death toll ticking higher and higher. That's also v'yamesh choshech, because you can feel it in this dread inside, right? Or every time, you know, we are just afraid for our future and for our children and grandchildren. It's anytime fear takes over our experience of the world, that is a darkness that descends. And so what are we doing in this mindfulness practice? In this mindfulness practice, we are identifying the darkness. We're feeling that darkness all the time. If we are angry and we're gripped by anger and resentment of people in our lives, or if we're feeling victimized by people who have done us wrong, that is another kind of darkness that descends on us, that can take over us, that can, in its worst form, can immobilize us in our lives, making us unable to leave our houses, either literally or proverbially. To leave our, you know, you ever see people who are become so embittered in their lives, they can never leave the same one perspective on everything? Well, because they've lived in a lifetime of resentment and victimization, right? Those are the Egyptians who can't leave Moshvotam. They can't leave their home. They can't leave their homes at all. They're stuck, right? We all become stuck in ego. And that's why this practice is so vital. Because just as Rabbi Nachman is teaching us, the point of life is to shine a light into that darkness. That's what we're doing. And every time we are in awareness and we can just see the darkness arising, and whatever the darkness's name, if it's fear, anger, resentment, hurt, worry, angst, restlessness, torpor, whatever it is, when we see it, suddenly the darkness no longer becomes like, as I had when I was depressed, this overwhelming weighing down even on my house, but it has edges. It no longer is all encompassing. It has an edge. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and we can see it. Then we are more than the darkness. That's what we're engaging in. Whatever darkness there is actually never defines us. And just as our commentators are pointing out, God maybe sent a plague of darkness, but all God did was, you know, maybe the sun didn't come up, whatever miracle God made. The real plague of darkness was already there in the Egyptians, right? And we're practicing now, we're cultivating the ability not to be defined by that same darkness. So that plague can never come upon us, right? You know, I'm reminded of another phrase, "V'lo yamush leolam va'ed," that we shall never be in angst again, right? And it rhymes with v'yamei choshech, right? It's something that you can never be plagued by again. So let's take a few minutes in our sit now, and let's not be afraid to look into the darkness now. And in the second half, I'll turn it to a more positive, a more positive exploration. But now we're not going to be afraid to look into the darkness, because this is such an important aspect of our practice. You know, meditation is not just about feeling good; it's about feeling whatever's there. And there is a deeper liberation that comes, because when we see, even when there is darkness there, there's a light beyond the darkness. So everyone, see if you can sit in an alert and relaxed position now, balanced in your chairs, balanced with feet on the floor, balanced in whatever position we're sitting in. See if you can relax. Maybe you want to just relax your shoulders and the tension in your neck. You might want to just gently, carefully undo any tension that are in your neck and shoulders without hurting your spinal cord or any other bones, right? Now let's take a nice deep breath in together. And release. Now a nice deep breath in again. And release. Now come back to normal breathing. Just allowing the breath to come and go as it does. And let's do just a quick body scan. Become aware of everything above your shoulders. Become aware of your head and your jaw, your ears, your face, your nose. Any sensations in your neck, any tensions or not tensions, just notice now. We're not moving in particular, we're just noticing. Any muscles in your face or jaw muscles, any sensations on your scalp. Bring our awareness down to our chest and our upper back area, bringing that scanning beam sort of further down to our sternum. Maybe include your upper arms in that. Noticing whatever sensations are present now in that part of our bodies. Maybe the rising and falling of our chest as we breathe. Notice our sensations in our back and our shoulders, our arms, our skin. Bringing the scan down now to our bellies, toward our seated pelvic area, and our forearms and our hands and fingers, just keeping everything along that line. Down to our upper legs, to our knees. And just hold this scan right there, and now just pay attention to the sensations of the rest of our bodies now, our bellies, and the muscles that are seated now, our lower back, the rising and falling of our belly with our breath. Noticing anything that's pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. And completing the scan, bringing it all the way down now. Shins and our calves and our feet and our toes. And now we're just holding that part of our bodies, anything pleasant, unpleasant, and anything in our experience now, our whole body, noticing all physicality, noticing the whole body now. What are we seeing? What are we feeling? And as we're sitting, we might notice things are popping up in our minds, as our minds do, maybe movies of things in past or future. And maybe there are feeling tones that are accompanying those thoughts. Pleasant feelings and emotions, unpleasant feelings and emotions, neutral feelings. And from this grounded place of our bodies, we're noticing the movement of the mind, the feelings in our heart, in our soul. And as we notice our thoughts, you might want to notice what's unpleasant in our thoughts, because they always come. And I want us to see and identify that with the darkness. And the darkness may have lots of color, it may have lots of light in our imagination, but it's not a darkness the way we think of darkness. It's just the darkness of ego, the darkness of worry and anxiety, the darkness of sadness and loss, the darkness of depression, the darkness of anger. And notice that the darkness can come and go. And maybe there are thoughts of light and joy and happiness and gratitude. And notice how we go back and forth. And then there's neutral thoughts as well. And we're just noticing. Maybe there's an unpleasant sensation in the body which can create a darkness of mind, a worry, a frustration. These are all like knots in our soul, and when they were knotted up, we're not spacious, we're not out of Mitzrayim. And so now we're not trying to push anything away. Just as feelings, pleasant and unpleasant and whatever come up, just notice how temporary they are. Notice how the mind wants to keep these and they believe that in some way they're permanent or they represent something that has always been and will always be. And notice how that's just a movement of the mind as well. And even that's a temporary idea. Just notice how everything is bounded. Nothing is permanent. Everything has its edges. And you are the awareness. The only thing that has no bounds, that has no edges, that has no end, is the light of your awareness. Notice that that awareness is infinitely vast. And no darkness, meaning no fears or angers or egoic movements of the mind, can ever be more than the vastness of this emptiness, this awareness, this love, this light within which all of these movements of mind come and go. So we're going to take the next couple of minutes just sitting with this awareness that is so much greater than any darkness. And see what happens in that awareness, in that process. Yeah, la 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 la. I la 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 and la 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 la. Yeah la 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 and la 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 la. I la 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 la. Okay, so this is the portion of our session where I open it up to any questions or reflections or questions about meditation practice or any troubles you ran into. You know, it's always good to share any troubles you ran into with the group because it makes all of us, the rest of us, feel better because we ran into those troubles too. So any questions or reflections of any kind?
Don't know, not to get politics into this, but I felt on Wednesday a great darkness lifted.
Yes. Amen, amen. Well, that's an example of Biyamesh Choshech. We just lived through 4 years of feeling a darkness weighing down on us, right? We know exactly what that is, living in that kind of fear. And that was Egypt, right? Egypt was also influenced by a dictator, by a megalomaniac who created a culture where everybody was living in that Biyamesh Choshech, right? And yet we were the Israelites, as we were attempting to be even during these 4 years, that we were attempting to remember the presence of light in our own dwellings, right? Rob?
I actually felt almost a different kind of depression after the inauguration. And I realized that it was post-traumatic stress induced, that the last 4 years have been so much fighting against something that's where my energy was going. And that I wasn't allowing myself to feel the negativity of the last 4 years until it was over.
Yes, yes, exactly. And so in that way, I also had this kind of bittersweet experience where there is this pain of knowing what we've just been through. You know, I had the news on last night and they were interviewing somebody in the new administration. You know what it was? I was talking to Mayor Pete. He's no longer Mayor Pete. And he was on MSNBC and just talking about his plans for infrastructure and transportation. And I was like, oh my God, I'm watching the news and they're just talking about governance. They're just talking about running a country. Like, and as wonderful as that was, there's this sense of, oh my God, we've just been through years where we haven't been able to think about how to move the country forward. Anyway, this is a meditation class, so Judy, and then Susan.
I hate to sound really observant because I'm not, but the thing that I kept coming back to during the whole 4 years, and personally too, are the lines from Tehillim about weeping endureth the night, but joy cometh in the morning. And I kept saying it happened thousands of years ago, and they knew that. And those few lines, as simple as they may seem, have brought me more comfort than I can say.
Thank you. Thank you. So beautiful. Susan.
I wanted to comment on your meditation.
Mm-hmm.
I really didn't want to go there today.
Mm.
And as I entered it, through my eyes, it was almost like a textured gray for a while. And then I felt the light from the sunshine and everything kind of surround it. It was just, it was an interesting meditation.
Wonderful, wonderful. That sounds really powerful. And sometimes we do experience these things very visually, right? Even if our eyes are closed, right? It can have very visual components, and just notice that, right? Just notice what that, where that brings you.
Mm.
And thank you. I'm sure others of us have had that in our experience. Julia, and then Patty.
With all of the talk and the meditation on darkness, all I could think about was light, because you don't know darkness unless you've had light, or you don't, they have to go together.
That's right. Well, you are all guessing what I'm about to go to in the second half of my teaching, which is all about light. And I just want to say, Julia, the visual of you look like more light in the dark.
I don't know why my camera isn't adjusting.
Very inspiring. It's really on theme. So thank you for that. Patty.
I was, when I got into this meditation, I thought, oh, this is a very distracted meditation for me, because my head was automatically I was in a very cerebral mode about a lot of dark things that have been going on for me now. But something really interesting happened in my active thinking, as opposed to just floating like I normally do. As soon as my head would go to this dark place, this heavy place, it quickly switched to realizing what the bright part of that was. And I haven't been able to really do that lately. I kind of have been staying in that darkness, thinking, all right, I'm going to just move through this and be with it. But it was almost like a piece of problem solving I was doing, and finding light and feeling so much better when I came out of it, even though it was a very busy meditation mentally, but it worked.
That's fine. Yeah.
Yeah. It worked for me nicely, actually.
Because, thank you for sharing, Patty. That is so important. So this is why it's so important for us to share our experiences with each other of this, because what you're identifying is so many of us think that we're getting it right when we're in this nirvana, no, we're getting it right. If our minds are busy, what Patty is describing is that she experienced a spaciousness in the midst of the busyness, that even if it wasn't like this, hippy-dippy spaciousness, she was able to then process on a more full level, which is what mindfulness practice can open up for you. So you have like Susan having these interesting visual things, and Patty having these really profound, her thinking became more spacious, and they're all correct. You're all getting it right. I saw one more hand, and then I want to go on to the next. Yeah, Sharon.
Telling myself I'm not incorrect, because it didn't feel like my meditation was responsive to either light or dark. I just went into whatever I went into. But what I want to say is, I was thinking about all this. There was an excellent book that I read years ago called Noonday Demon, about depression. And the author talks from a first person standpoint in a way that helped me understand deep depression in a way that I never had before. He said, it's like you're in bed and you are dying of thirst. You are so dying of thirst that every cell in your body is needing something to drink. And there's a glass of water right next to you on the table, but it's too hard to pick it up and take a sip. So when I think about that depression, one of the problems with depression is people often can't do just the thing, like to call the therapist or to meditate or to pray or to do whatever it is that would bring them out, because it just feels like such hard work.
Yes, indeed. And that's why, God forbid, when people commit suicide, I shudder to think of how generations past would somehow think that person is a sinner or done something wrong, when it's the disease of a crushing depression that can bring that about. And that the plague of darkness is a horrible plague. The Marash Chora, as Rabbi Nachman called it. And that's why, if we can cultivate this practice when we are strong, then God forbid may none of us be stricken with depression, but this helps. One more, Diane.
So I was thinking, throughout these months of COVID and how I found through this time, almost each day, there were times that felt very dark in listening to the news and listening to clients and hearing the struggles of what was going on, but also trying very hard to still see a pathway to light. But the juxtaposition was really very clear throughout this time of trying for myself and then encouraging others to still be able to see something that felt light or felt positive, even during days that were pulling a great many of us down.
Yes.
And then during this sit, I had this vision of being in this beautiful ocean. I was just sort of afloat and yet aware that there were these pools or these pockets of darkness, almost like something that I could go towards and near. But if I got too close or got too into it, I could be pulled down. And instead, this fight trying to very much stay where I could see the blue and see the sun, but very aware that there was darkness and I was aware of it and I knew about it, but I had to try to live this balance. And it was very visual in that time.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. And that's a very powerful metaphor for how the practice can bring us into a balance, because it's so easy for us to get sucked into that darkness. You're so right. And that's why this practice is so important. And this is a great lead into the final set of teachings I wanted to share. Here's the Dalai Lama. Inner darkness, which we call ignorance. Now he has a different name for ignorance, is the root of suffering. The more inner light comes, the more darkness will diminish. This is the only way to achieve salvation or nirvana, right? So here, ignorance, he's saying, is darkness. Ignorance meaning the ignorance is that, to extend your metaphor, Diane, it's the thing that allows us to get sucked in is when we're in ignorance, when we're not paying attention, right? And when you're floating in that blue, right, then you're not in ignorance. Then you're aware of the whole, right? So that's and we're moving now toward more light in these quotes, right? Gandhi, for I can see in the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists. In the midst of darkness, light persists. Even a single lamp dispels the deepest darkness, right? So, and this is a good mindfulness instruction for those moments when we do get sucked in, because we all get sucked in. We all forget our mindful mochin the gadlut, our greater mind, and we can get sucked in. But then, just a single lamp in the midst of that darkness can begin to dispel it. Meaning, where can we find stillness, even as our minds are racing or we're falling into depression or anger or fear or any of these states that darken our universe? Where can we find the stillness to notice what's really going on, right? And I also just wanted to bring, you have this wonderful quote about a single lamp dispelling the darkness from Gandhi. And isn't it remarkable, Anne Frank, look how a single candle can both defy and define the darkness, right? This little girl, this remarkable little girl who was speaking the highest spiritual truths, right up there with Gandhi and the Dalai Lama and everyone else. That's how remarkable that child was, and what an extraordinary loss it was in the darkness of the Shoah that we lost her. But her light, her candle survives and shows us the same wisdom, that what we are cultivating here is that capacity to, even when we're going through a sit and our minds are racing the whole time, if there's a single moment when we can shine the light of awareness, then that meditation was a perfect success, right? That's how we can take this into our practice. Here's Byron Katie, another spiritual teacher. She says, it's not the darkness that people fear. It's what they imagine into the darkness. An unquestioned mind is the world of suffering. I love that. Darkness happens, right? Life gets difficult. Things don't go the way we expected them. Loved ones die. Loss is a part of our reality. And just like the Egyptians, as I said before, that maybe the sky went dark, but then it was the suffering that was created by the Egyptians being like the first Adam in the world, who they only had their fear. They only had their worst nightmare to project into that darkness that made it into an unspeakable suffering, right? And so the questioned mind is one that pauses and says, wait a minute, is this true? Is this darkness greater than the light that I really am? Right, that's the process, right? It's like, remember I talked about the difference between pain and suffering, right? Pain happens. Pain is just a part of reality. Suffering is when we project the thought onto the pain of, this pain is never going to go away. This is going to be here forever. Or this pain shouldn't be happening. Then there's suffering. So that's the way to shine the light into the darkness, right? It's that even when there's darkness, you can simply begin to question its all-encompassingness. Doesn't mean you're going to succeed, especially if you're depressed. You're not going to necessarily suddenly banish all darkness. But that very act of defiance of saying, is this really true? Is there something more to my awareness than just this? Just in asking that question, there is a light that can light up the darkness. Right? That's the power of mindfulness. It's the power of awareness. It's the power of who we really, really, really are. That vastness of that is the light that what we really are. It's so much more than any darkness. And finally, couldn't resist sharing this, right? Because she said it best. And in light of everything that we've been talking about, how we can't help but think about what's happening in history around us, there is always light if we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it. That's my whole lesson, right? That's it. Right? That's exactly what we've been teaching, right? And that's what the Israelites were brave enough to see and to be in the story of the plagues of Egypt, in the plague of darkness, right? Is that is that the story teaches that we have within ourselves to have the bravery and the courage, even in the midst of the darkness, to affirm the presence of light. So let's do a final sit now. Instead of focusing on the dark, let's focus on the light in our final sit today. Okay, so everybody assume the correct position. And now one more deep cleansing breath now. And release it. And come to your normal breath. Just enjoy breathing in the light of life through each breath. Breathing in the energy that courses through our veins and the beating of our hearts. Breathing in the life force, the light of being alive that animates every cell of our bodies. And being the light of consciousness, of awareness itself. That light within which all thought and all feeling comes and goes. You know, it's like the movie projector, right? That's the bright light behind a movie projector is always shining. And then as the film goes across it, it temporarily darkens it with different images and colors and shapes. But the light is always there. And even in the movie, there can be a scene of great darkness. But the darkness is just, even the darkness is being illuminated at all moments. Right? That's what's happening in our minds. That's what's happening in our entire perception of reality. It's just like the film going over the dark, going over the light. That is who you really, really are. You are that undimmed, infinite light of God. The undimmed, infinite light of awareness. The undimming, infinite light of love itself. And when we really get still and notice the nature of that light, it is never tarnished by the stain of life's suffering and loss. It is never ensnared in the fears and hurts and resentments of life. It is never dimmed by regret or by despair. The light just shines, perfect, untouched. So let's follow Miss Gorman's advice and be the light now in this sit. Fully inhabit that light now. Even as sensations come and go and darken that movie screen, even as thoughts that might be negative thoughts, even as emotions that might be so difficult to bear, they come within the light and then they go, and the light is unchanged. That is who you really, really are. In the last couple of minutes now, just inhabit the light that you really are. Ya da 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 da. Ya da 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 da. Ya la 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 la. Ya la la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Yeah. Okay, everybody, that's our session for today. I want to wish everybody a beautiful rest of your day and a Shabbat Shalom.